listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Welcome to the mother of all talk shows, the Open University of the Airwaves, the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees and where you are positively encouraged to speak back to the teacher. That'll be me, undereducated though I am. We are on air everywhere in the world, and we want your calls, your emails, and your tweets, because tonight is going to be about maximum engagement on everything from the royal family to the coronavirus. Everything from the Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, to Yuri Gagarin. And that is more than half a world, I can tell you. So fasten your seatbelts, because this is rock and roll radio with pictures. It's going to be a bumpy ride, because it is the mother of all talk shows. For the next 3 hours.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
And we are live for the next 3 hours. And we want your maximum engagement, please, on all the many issues that we'll be touching on this evening. We are, of course, live on FM in the Washington, D.C. area. 105.5 are the magic numbers there. Donald Trump used to listen to the show in crystal clarity on FM, but he's not around in D.C. all that much anymore. And Joe Biden doesn't know how to find us on the dial, but then he doesn't know where to find the bathroom door on the dial or anywhere else. And of course, we are coast to coast in the United States on AM from Burning City to Burning City. We are live across the whole world on SputnikNews.com. But if you are one of the 500,000 people now with monotonous regularity who watch as well as listen to the mother of all talk shows, listen to this. If you are on Facebook, where Big Algorithm continues to haunt us, strangle us, attempt to kill us, if you are watching on Facebook, please share now with all of your contacts, all of your friends. Confound Big Algorithm. You can watch on my own Facebook page, George Galloway Official, blue tick. Follow me there if you will. I've got over 600,000, maybe much more than that, I no longer know, on Facebook. But you can watch on RT's multiple Facebook portals. Also, ditto on YouTube. You can watch on my own YouTube channel. If you do, please subscribe. Or on RT's multiple YouTube channels. You can watch on Twitter, where I say this every week because it's true every week. An ever larger number are watching. I'm the guy that never thought 5G would catch on. Who wants to watch things on their telephone? I said, well, 30,000 of you watched live on Twitter on their telephones last week. Let's see if we can beat it again this week. We are literally setting a new record every single week. You can watch on Instagram, I think. You can certainly watch on Twitch. You can watch on my Telegram channel, which is t.me/George Galloway. And you can, oh, goodness knows how many new platforms. There's platforms I'm being told we're on that I have never heard of before. But hey, I'm 45 years old. A man who was 99 years old passed away just the other day. You may have noticed. He was His Royal Highness, the Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. And many, many people were saddened by his demise. First and foremost, of course, Her Majesty the Queen, to whom he had been married for the staggering total of 73 years. There can be no doubt at all that Prince Philip has created what the Queen was said to have called today or yesterday a huge void in her life. How could it be otherwise after 73 years of marriage? And nobody could claim that he didn't do his duty for all of those 73 years. Nobody could claim, surely, that he hadn't been a devoted consort, a man who worked for a living. It's not work as we know it. It's not hewing coal. It's not drawing wood. It's not working in an assembly line in a factory, but it is work, let me tell you, facing the public every single day, 5 at least, sometimes 6, sometimes 7 days a week, and having to be on, to having to be on show, to having to be on stage for 73 years for the great majority of days of the week is not, I assure you, easy. I met the Duke of Edinburgh twice, though one of those times was as a wine waiter when I served him and Her Majesty at the Angus Hotel, no longer there, in Dundee during a state visit to my hometown. I told him that story on the second occasion that I met him inside Buckingham Palace at a reception. He was quite taken by the fact that a wine waiter had made it into the palace, because he asked me, "And what are you doing here this evening?" And I answered, drawing myself up to my full 5'9", "Well, I'm the Member of Parliament for the Glasgow Hillhead constituency," I said. He replied, "Good God, are you really?" But he was joking, and I later learned this weekend, actually, that he said exactly the same thing to my former parliamentary colleague, Giles Brandreth, at Chester Zoo. "Good God, are you really?" But he said it with a laugh. And I've got to tell you something you'll probably be surprised to hear. Although I have written it before in my newspaper columns in the Daily Mail, Mail on Sunday, and elsewhere. I liked the Duke of Edinburgh. As a matter of fact, he was my favourite member of the royal family. He and the daughter, Princess Anne, who is most like him. No nonsense, down to earth, not politically correct, no snowflake, ready to dish out the most politically incorrect insults, but to receive them back. That's my impression of this man who made such an impression on Britain. Now, not everybody mourned his passing. It certainly brought out the worst in those people who run around telling us how left-wing they are. They have no idea how to behave. They haven't been brought up right, these people. They've spent too much time in the student squat of left-wing Labour politics. They don't know when to shut their trap. They don't know when it's better to say nothing if you can say nothing nice or good or kind. That's why they are 13 points behind the Conservative Party in the opinion polls. That's why the Red Wall has been demolished. That's why it will never be rebuilt. Because culturally, the people who call themselves left-wing actually hate the British people deep in their hearts. They hate the fact that the British people actually were saddened by the passing of the Duke of Edinburgh. They hate the fact that the British people quite like their flag. They hate the fact that the British people do not go around hangdog with their heads hung in shame for all the reasons that the left would like them to. They hate their country, that's why they loved the European Union. They hate their country, that's why they love Nicola Sturgeon and the incipient nationalism of the SNP. Put them face to face with a Flemish nationalist or a Northern Italy nationalist, and they'd run a mile. But a Scottish nationalist, one that wants to break up their own country, they love it. And they love it because they believe that their own country deserves it. Deserves it for having voted for Brexit, deserves it for having been saddened by the passing of the Duke of Edinburgh, and for 1,000 other reasons. Speaking of Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP, although Miss Sturgeon herself made a perfectly gracious comment on the demise of the Duke of Edinburgh, as well she might. He was the Duke of Edinburgh, the capital city of Scotland, but she did. But she might as well not have bothered, because 1,000, maybe 10,000 of her followers then weighed in to show their lack of class. Some of them even called the Duke of Edinburgh a fascist, which was ironic on two counts. First of all, the Duke of Edinburgh fought fascism in the Second World War, real fascists. He killed some of them and risked being killed himself to do so. He had no need to do so. It was not his duty to do so. He volunteered to do so. So to call the Duke of Edinburgh a Nazi was particularly grotesque, but especially coming from a Scottish nationalist. Because the Scottish Nationalist Party was actually founded by a fascist, a Nazi collaborator, who intrigued with Hitler and his officials to help facilitate a successful Nazi invasion and occupation of these islands. In exchange, they hoped, couldn't be sure, that they would get the Gauleiter gig once Hitler had established himself in the heart of London. They thought, Arthur Donaldson, the founder of the SNP, thought that he would get the gig as MacMosley, as the Scottish equivalent of Sir Oswald Mosley, who would have played the same role of Gauleiter in the Westminster Parliament. He was monitored by the security services while doing it, and was arrested, and was interned in the Second World War. You'd think that Scottish nationalists, founded by such a man, such a current, he wasn't alone, there were several of them, would hold their wheesht about people being Nazis and fascists. So, a lot of people showed their worst side, put their ugly foot forward when faced with the demise of the Queen's husband this week. Us here in the mother of all talk shows take our hat off to the late Duke of Edinburgh. May he rest in peace, and may God give Her Majesty the Queen the strength to bear his very considerable loss. We'll be talking about all of those matters intermittently over the course of the next 3 hours or so. We'll be asking the question, what is fascism? And how should we fight it? Should we fight it like that Irish woman, Violet Gibson, who actually had the courage to try and shoot Mussolini? her reward for which was decades of oblivion in a mental asylum and decades of forgetfulness from people who regarded themselves as anti-fascists in Ireland, in Britain, and around the world. Barrie Dowdall, the filmmaker, is bringing her back to life with his new film about the Irish woman that tried to shoot Mussolini. We'll be talking about Ireland in the round because things are looking dark in Northern Ireland, in Belfast in particular, but not only in Belfast, as widespread rioting shows some signs of slipping over that line towards intercommunal violence and the danger therein of a return to days we thought had passed with the passage of the Good Friday Agreement, the Belfast Agreement in 1998. We'll be talking to Kevin Marr, a former Labour parliamentary advisor on Irish matters, on this subject. And we'll be talking also to our very own Moats medic, Dr. Ranjeet Brar, about the coronavirus, now that we are coming to the end, at least, of the beginning, hopefully the beginning of the end of what has been one of the darkest periods in post-war British history, the period in which we lost 127,000 people dead as a result of a pandemic that we had plenty of time to see coming, and which we compounded by cockamamie policies, by corrupt practices, and by the hubris, the vainglory of one-upmanship. The Scottish Minister of Health, outgoing, Jean Freeman, has conceded this week that it was a mistake to shunt our old people in Scotland out of hospital and into care homes where not the slightest precaution could be taken against them killing themselves and others with the infection they already had. She called it a mistake. I call it a crime for which I, myself, am determined that she and her government must face justice and accountability. And lastly, we'll also be talking to the last Arab. I mean that. I used to always say it to him, but now I mean it because my knowledge is much greater now. Abdel Bari Atwan, the editor of Al-Quds Al-Arabi, is the last Arab. By which I mean he's the last Arab with the dignity for which Arabs were once famous. Incorruptible, that's why he's only on the internet and doesn't have 2 shillings to rub together. Even though it's very, very, very easy to be a corrupted Arab journalist. Even more easy than it is to be a corrupt British journalist. And that's easy enough. Abdel Bari Atwan is a man of pristine character who tells the truth, whatever the consequences. And I'm going to be asking him about what's happening in the Hashemite kingdom, for now, of Jordan. It's all coming up over the next 2 hours and 40 minutes. I've got a poll running. Has the media coverage of the Duke of Edinburgh's death been A, measured, B, over the top, C, obsequious? Vote now on my Twitter feed, George Galloway. I'll be right back.
Radio Sputnik.
So let me issue a call, a challenge now to Alex Salmond. I challenge Alex Salmond to a head-to-head debate on independence, separatism, versus my plan for remaining within Britain and fighting for a new Britain. And I think that would be big box office, as John McTernan put it. I don't know why a broadcaster's not biting my hand off for that proposal. But one thing is clear. You can refuse to refer to the elephants in the room, but that doesn't mean the elephants are not in the room. That doesn't mean the people can't see and feel the presence of the elephants. And the elephants in this contest are Alex Salmond and me. Separatism versus unionism. Let's get it on, Alec. I'm sure there'll be plenty of people who would be happy to film it.
Sputnik has been launched to give you a closer look at everything happening in the world. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Well, I'm glad to say that Mr. Alex Salmond will debate me, courtesy of Mr. Andrew Neil, and on Spectator TV. Mr. Salmond didn't accept it directly with me, but I am given to understand that towards the end of this month, the heavyweight rumble in the heather will take place on Spectator TV with the redoubtable, the unimpeachable, peerless Andrew Neil as the referee. Just me and Salmond in the ring with Andrew Neil as the referee. What could be better than that? Well, as the TV bosses who've refused both Salmond and me a place on their debates will quickly find out. And not only will the rumble in the heather between me and Salmond be a more interesting affair than theirs, it'll also get a bigger audience. Eat your hearts out, BBC Scotland and SNP TV. Now, has the media coverage of the Duke of Edinburgh's death been A, measured, 58%, B, over the top, 32%, C, obsequious, 10%. Almost 1,000 people have voted already, and I've just announced it. You can vote on my Twitter feed. Now, I don't know if the flames are licking the buses this evening in Belfast, but it's been quite a hairy week or so. Kevin Marr, former Labour advisor on Ireland, joins me now to bring us up to date. Kevin, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. A splendid beard since the last time I saw you. Absolutely splendid. Puts mine to shame.
You've set a trend, George.
Now, Kevin, first of all, tell us what's happening, if you would, and then, perhaps more importantly, why it's happening.
Certainly. So we've seen for the last week or so serious disturbances on the streets of Belfast, reminiscent of the scenes we would have seen, I guess, a generation ago, and from the time of the late 1960s, really. So a blast from the past, and an unwelcome one. I think everybody agrees on that point, at least. Loyalists have been agitating for several weeks now about their concerns about the operation of the Northern Ireland Protocol. This is the arrangement, the Brexit arrangement, that avoids a hard border on the island of Ireland, but needs border checks at the ports with goods coming in from Britain to Northern Ireland as though they were treated from a third country. Now, for unionists and loyalists, this is an issue of principle. They perceive that the deal, the Northern Ireland Protocol, makes them less British, puts a division in the way of being able to import and export goods, creates, in effect, a border in the Irish Sea. And they're not very happy about that. And they've been saying this for quite some time. And what happened about a month ago is that the if I can put it like this, the trade association for the loyalist paramilitaries, many of which still exist in some form or other, made it clear that they were going to withdraw their support cryptically from the Good Friday Agreement settlement and institutions, which is, of course, massively concerning. And it's focused a lot of attention. And what started to happen is we've seen night after night of disturbances, particularly in flashpoint areas in Belfast, which is doubly concerning for the effects that might have in turning this into a wider conflagration. And that's been slightly bookended with the death of the Duke of Edinburgh, which seems to have curtailed that a little bit. There were some disturbances last night, but I've not seen any reports of any yet tonight. But that's, I think, an issue that's in abeyance, and I think we're going to come back to this again. So it's a very difficult issue because there's nothing in effect the British government can do to assuage them. The Northern Ireland Protocol is the plug in the bathtub. Boris Johnson has filled this bathtub. The protocol is the plug. Removing the protocol removes the plug, and the entire Brexit deal goes down the plug hole. That's not going to happen. So there's no wiggle room here. The British government is not going to give in to unionists and loyalists, much as it wants to try and keep these people on side, much as it wants to try and assuage them and get past this difficulty. It is not going to give in on the issue of substance, which is the protocol, because Northern Ireland represents 1.5% of the UK economy, and unionists and loyalists about 1% of the UK population. So the idea that the whole Brexit deal is going to go down the bathtub, the bath plug, just to please such a marginal part of the UK, just isn't going to happen. So we're in a very difficult situation where unionist leaders who are not really in control of loyalists on the streets, they're being led by the nose a little bit by the shadowy figures and the loyalist paramilitaries who are behind all this. There is no wiggle room for a British Prime Minister to assuage their concerns. And the difficulty for unionist political leaders is that they're going to march their people up to the top of the hill and have to march them back down again at some stage.
Why did Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party betray their unionist friends? They said that they would not allow a border in the middle of the Irish Sea before promptly drawing one there. They said they would never allow Northern Ireland to be treated differently from any other part of Britain just before actually doing so. It quite surprises me because I still sometimes, more than sometimes, get attacked by friends of the unionist population in Northern Ireland on behalf of the Conservative Party. But it wasn't me that betrayed the unionists in Northern Ireland, it was the Conservative Party. Explain.
I think the word betrayal is key there. I don't think that's hyperbole at all. Boris Johnson attended the DUP's conference back in 2008 when he was on manoeuvres, obviously trying to replace Theresa May, and told them in that usual Boris Johnson jocular shoot from the hip style that, of course, there would be no border in the Irish Sea, that just would not happen. That's not what his politics was about. And of course, as the deal inched towards conclusion in the run-up to the signing of the deal at the end of last year, that's exactly what he agreed to. So unionists, in some respects, yes, have been led up the path by Boris Johnson and Michael Gove and some of these other Conservative politicians that have got a very strong commitment to the union and are as friendly as friendly towards unionists as you're going to get in British politics. So the fact that they've betrayed them, I think, makes it doubly significant. And I think that the difficulty for unionists in misreading what was going to happen with Brexit, there was always going to be a deal. I mean, that's just the way politics at this level works. And that deal would involve squeezing the unionist position. And that's exactly what happened. And I don't think the DUP in particular, as the cock of the walk, if you like, of unionist politics, prepared for that and gamed those scenarios out clearly enough. Now, if you roll back a few months towards the start of the year, you've got Arlene Foster trying to make the best of the protocol, which can allow Northern Ireland to have economic benefits of being part of the UK and also part of the EU single market. If Northern Ireland played its cards really well, it could come out of this smelling of roses. But of course, the symbolism and the identity politics take priority over economic rationalism every single time. So at the start of the year, Arlene Foster is, in a sense, trying to make the best of this, trying to sort of say, well, we're done with it, so we may as well try and make this work. And that position has been superseded because of an opinion poll a few weeks ago, which was very stark and showed that the DUP's support is melting at both ends. They're losing support to the hardline, traditional Ulster Voice party of Jim Allister, neo-Paisleyite faction. And they're also losing support towards the Moderate Alliance party as well. So the DUP is on the traditional burning platform, burning at both ends. And rather predictably, what they've done is, instead of trying to win back moderates and pull them back into their coalition, they've gone chasing the hardliners, and they've gone cap in hand, literally, to the loyalist godfathers. And we're in a position that's a bit reminiscent of the arrangements around the Anglo-Irish Agreement 35 years ago, where again, unionists of all stripes and loyalists clubbed together to try and face down a British government, and they got nowhere then, and they're not going to get anywhere this time either. And why this matters is that we are 12 months away from the Northern Ireland Assembly elections, and if the DUP is in the state that it's in today, then we're going to see the unionist vote split in multiple directions, and Sinn Féin, which may emerge as the largest party anyway, because of the demographic changes in Northern Ireland, I think is all but certain to win top spot next May, pretty much come what may.
Yeah, if that matters by then, we must hope that it does, but it might not. What do you say to the people that accuse the European Union of deliberately weaponizing the Northern Irish situation, again as punishment for Brexit?
I think the British government has gone into this with its eyes open. There's got to be a border somewhere. You either do it on the island of Ireland, which is difficult for two reasons. Difficult, of course, because the symbolism works the other way, and the symbolism of having a hard border on the island of Ireland kind of rolls us back to before the Good Friday Agreement a quarter of a century ago. And the fear is that dissident Republicans would attack any border infrastructure and would end up with a problem at that end as well. And I think, to be fair to the loyalists, the statement they issued a couple of days ago kind of recognises there's no ideal scenario here. Somebody's identity and sense of self is very severely threatened, however you do this. But the fact is that if you're looking at this purely rationally, you would do it the way that the protocol does it at the moment, which is do this at the ports rather than try and enforce a demarcation across a 310-mile piece of border, which goes through fields and farms and what have you. It's much easier to do it this way. So that, in a sense, also helps to tip the balance towards the Northern Ireland Protocol. And it's interesting, what we've seen in the last 24 hours is the Irish government urged the British government to hold talks, intergovernmental talks, because of what's been going on in Belfast, to try and preserve and support the Good Friday Agreement institutions. The British government doesn't want to do that. And what's interesting for me in that is that really what's happened is the British government, in a very Winston Smith sense, has learned to love the protocol. It's, I think, accepted that it's here to stay, and it's getting on with implementing it. And what it's going to try and do, I think, instead with loyalists is just the traditional British way of handling problems that you can't really resolve, which is just to throw a bit of cash at them. And there's an announcement today of an extra £10 million towards projects, particularly in loyalist areas. So it's a kind of fairly classic British position of, we've had a lot of bluster, there's now some realpolitik. The realpolitik is the protocol is here to stay. The British government is getting on and implementing it, and what it's trying to do is buy off opposition, and we'll have to wait and see if that works or not.
Well, we will, and have you back, I hope, Kevin, to keep us updated. Kevin Marr, commentator on Irish affairs, former Labour parliamentary advisor on Ireland. So the poll is, has the media coverage of the Duke of Edinburgh's death been A, measured, B, over the top, C, obsequious? We need your votes on that. Now, you can call if you want to talk about any of the things I've said in my introduction, or anything that Kevin Marr just said there, as Gary in Belfast has just done. That's why he is the first call of the evening. Gary, welcome.
Good evening, George. I'm flattered that I'm your first caller.
First caller, most welcome. Go ahead, Gary.
Well, George, today, as you know, I think is the anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, or what I would call a Bad Friday Agreement. And I believe that Northern Ireland would be better suited to a joint sovereignty arrangement.
Is anyone proposing that, Gary, or are you a lone standard bearer for that?
Well, I am probably just somebody who specialises in thinking outside of the box.
Yeah.
In fact, I think so
Fair.
far outside of the box,
I
don't even know where the box is.
Yeah, I like people like that. So explain to us what you mean by that.
Well, just also to answer your previous question, George, I did actually Google last night. I took the liberty of finding out that actually Leo Varadkar has actually suggested joint authority, which is obviously similar. But to rationalise my own thinking, it's that there's clearly a lot of people in Northern Ireland who do not want direct rule. They're the Nationalist Republican people, and I'm a unionist with a small u, but I have to respect the fact that a lot of people who do not want direct rule. By the same token, as you can see from the hysteria of the last week with the riots, there's an awful lot of people in Northern Ireland who would not want a united Ireland. There's a lot of kind of paranoia about the Irish Sea border, the Northern Ireland Protocol. So there's a lot of people who just won't buy into a 32-county state. So I believe it would be better if Northern Ireland was sort of subject to a kind of a council of ministers, which would be maybe 5 people from the UK and 5 people from the Republic of Ireland. And that council of ministers, which would be like effectively a cabinet of 10, a kind of an executive, it would require 8 people within that cabinet to reach a decision. So therefore, you couldn't have the British steamrolling through decisions against the will of the Irish. And
what about the people of Northern Ireland, the executive that they have elected?
Yeah.
Do we retire the Northern Ireland political class?
Well, the Northern Ireland political class have got their own councils to begin with. I mean, at a local level, they've got councils. But I mean, let's face it, there's an absurdity about having 6 counties that have a devolved administration. 6 counties with a devolved government. I mean, could you imagine if you take that mathematical model, if you take the Republic of Ireland, for example, which is 26 counties, could you imagine the Republic of Ireland being carved up into 4 devolved administrations? Could you imagine England having about a dozen or more devolved executives? I mean, it's an absurdity. So I think there's something really nonsensical about 6 counties in the corner of the United Kingdom, 6 counties that have their own devolved executives. I think it's not proven to be a recipe for success, because the legacy of the Good Friday Agreement is we're left with a dysfunctional executive in which we've got 2 warring factions. I mean, it's hard to dress it up in any other way. Sinn Féin and the DUP, who are the leading players in the executive, they despise one another. The supporters despise one another. And so the legacy of the Good Friday Agreement, I'm afraid, is that we've got a dysfunctional executive.
Very interesting, Gary. Thanks for kicking off the debate. I'm sure it will now rage. Fra in Belfast is on the same subject. Fra, welcome.
Hi, George. Thanks very much for having me on the show.
Welcome.
George, thank you. I was actually on the interfaces over the last few nights when I had the serious disorder between, basically from what I could see, young children and young men between, anywhere between 12 and about 20. I'd say the average age was about 16. Part of the reason I phoned up, apart from the whole analysis of what's going on in the background, is really to flag up the potential for a return to sectarian intercommunal violence, because what we witnessed the beginning of really 10 or 11 days ago was loyalist reactionary violence, which started off on the waterside up in Bari, and then it spread to Belfast last Wednesday, when what you had was a protest on the peace line between the Shankill Road and the Springfield Road, between the Protestant Shankill and the Catholic Falls. This spilled over into violence, which resulted in the first time that the nationalists have come into contact or conflict with the security forces due to the violent protests of loyalism. So you've had the DUP calling for the resignation of the Chief Constable due to the ongoing saga of the funeral of Bobby Story, where the police had actually contacted the Public Prosecution Service to proactively prosecute 29 Sinn Féin elected representatives who had attended that funeral due to potential breaches of the COVID regulations. But the PPS said there was no definition of exactly what the protocol that the people had broken, and they didn't bring forward the prosecutions, which led to the DUP calling for the resignation of the chief constable. And then the political sabre rattling around Bobby Story's funeral, followed by the Northern Ireland protocol. Now, that sabre rattling, every time it has been proved in Irish history, especially in the north of Ireland, when political unionism doesn't get to deliver what concessions they want for the British government, they then threaten the violence from the loyalist paramilitaries, and that's what happens and has happened, that the DUP has failed to deliver on the Northern Ireland Protocol. So they feel politically, and the loyalist paramilitaries are trying to use violence to force concessions from the British government, which won't happen anytime soon. And I believe that the reason there was violence between the Protestant pro-British Tigers Bay and the Irish Catholic New Lodge and the Falls and the Shankill is loyalist paramilitaries trying to draw in nationalist youths who, were born after the Good Friday Agreement, who have never witnessed the level of violence that a lot of us have seen since 1969. And the potential is there, because I read today that 3 Catholic homes in a Protestant estate in Carrickfergus had their houses attacked by paramilitaries who may be linked to the Ulster Volunteer Force. So,
well, you say that, but let's define our terms.
Yes,
every report that I've seen has said that the people involved in these scenes are extremely young, i.e. are not actually paramilitaries. They may be the children of paramilitaries, but if that's what the paramilitaries are, 14, 13-year-old boys, then obviously we're in a different ballgame altogether. When you say these 3 houses were attacked by paramilitaries, is that actually what you mean?
Yes, because this is a report in one of the Sunday papers. It's either the Sunday Life or the Sunday World. I read that on social media today. People have it up. So that's a story by a journalist for one of the, quote, national newspapers here in the north. George, I've equivocally said that the kids that I have seen have been 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Now, that's the ones that I witnessed on the nationalist side, on the Springfield Road, who were reacting to perceived provocation along the peace line. And I think it's the same, but, yeah, just to clarify this, if you've seen some of the media coverage of the loyalist riots in Clough-Fern and in Carrickfergus, where they were using petrol bombs, these were grown men. These were guys in their 20s and 30s, if not older, some of them. Okay. And some of the people that were involved in the violence on the Shankill Road, there can be younger men directed by older men. Well,
I have heard that. I have heard that said, yeah. Fra, thanks for that call. Keep your calls coming in on the Duke of Edinburgh and on the situation in Northern Ireland. Maybe I should give you our number, which is normally on the bottom of my paper, but is not yet on the bottom of my paper. I'll give it to you later, though you possibly know it. There it is on the screen. Even better. Let me take a 2-minute break.
Radio Sputnik.
Time, weather, and always. Let's play a game, and I'll ask you yes or no questions. Ready? Okay, then. Sick and tired of hearing the same old voices on the wireless? Are you looking for an alternative opinion to the mainstream media? Do you have a thing for a Scottish accent? If your answer is no to one or more of these questions, then you need the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. Listen, watch, and share the fastest growing political program in the world.
of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Well, the poll is doing a roaring trade. Get your vote in now on my Twitter feed. George Galloway, blue tick. George Galloway official on Twitter. Now, I did tell you earlier about Violet Gibson, the Irish woman who shot Mussolini. You didn't know that, did you? You didn't know that that Irish woman could have changed the course of history. She had Il Duce in her sights, and she pulled the trigger. Not that she got much thanks for it, either back in England or by history, and definitely not in Ireland. Barrie Dowdall, a famous documentary filmmaker, directed and produced Violet Gibson, the Irish woman who shot Mussolini. Let's see a quick excerpt of it.
Why did you shoot Mussolini?
Me? Shoot? I don't know Mussolini.
I've known about Violet ever since I was a little girl and been very sort of proud of the story because it's so bizarre.
Violet's childhood was pampered, was privileged, and also because of her illness, definitely held back from the world, sequestered, as so many Victorian young women were.
So in the picture there is the future king and queen, and there's also Violet Gibson on the right, and she's there as a 21-year-old.
Che cosa? E re?
No. Il Duce!
Violet herself was involved in the pacifist movement before the First World War.
Where did you get the gun? Who gave you the gun?
The Pope sends a message saying how relieved he is that Mussolini has been spared by God. Telegrams come in from the President of the United States, from King George V.
Why did I shoot Mussolini? I did it for love.
She does write a letter saying, I'm so glad God gave me an Irish tongue to lead them all a merry dance. Mussolini wanted this over with as soon as possible, and he wanted Violet spirited out of the country. Basically, a deal was done.
Can you believe it, Constance? By going home?
There's the reveal when she's finally dumped at St Andrews. It was because she was a woman, she was hidden away and she was completely silenced, that nobody bothered to remember her.
If she had been a man, we would be having statues all over the place to her.
Now, Barrie Dowdall, who made this excellent film, joins me here on the Mother of All Talk Shows. Good evening, Barrie. Thank you for joining us. Kindly explain who was Violet Gibson? What did she do and why did she do it?
Well, thanks for having me on your show, for starters.
Welcome.
Violet was the daughter of the Lord Chancellor in Ireland. So she came from a very, very privileged background. They were well connected in royal circles. Her father at one time was, they thought he might be the next prime minister. And he was been like people like Benjamin Disraeli, etc., had their eye on him. So she came from a very, very privileged background and from a family who were they lived in Merrion Square, which is a Georgian square in Dublin. And they would have been an influential family and quite a religious family as well too. Her mother was a Christian Scientist and her father was a Church of Ireland Protestant, and her sister was one of the first readers in the Christian Science Church in Belfast. So, you know, she definitely privileged, and like she would have been a debutante in the court of Queen Victoria. So really well connected.
So what did she then do and why?
Well, as a young woman growing up, she was very she had an allowance, and she spent a lot of time traveling alone with this sort of an allowance that she had. And she traveled a lot to Italy and to Switzerland, and she was into theosophy, and she converted to Catholicism in her mid-20s, and had a deep interest in Italian affairs. And from what we can gather and what we know is she was keeping a sharp eye on what was happening with the rise of fascism and what was happening in Italy at the time. And she was interested in Italian politics. And I think she saw that this evil, this fascism was going to destroy the country that she loved. And, she was right.
Indeed she was. Was she working with anyone else, though? Or was this just, a lone wolf attack?
A lone wolf attack. Well, I mean, it's interesting. She spent a lot of time hanging out in Trastevere, which is was the last bastion of opposition to Mussolini. And when she was being interrogated, she never gave the game away or never said she was involved with there was anyone else involved. In the trailer that she said she did it for love, she did it for God. She spun them a merry dance. Thank God I had an Irish tongue. We kind of think there might have been somebody else involved, because like Ernesto Buonaiuti was there. And this is where, if there was any resistance, that's where she would find it. And importantly, she did try to commit suicide about a year before she shot Mussolini, and failed. And whether we don't know whether, like, she was into religion and maybe the sense of sacrifice, and maybe she hesitated in the idea of shooting Mussolini. But that gun was confiscated. So, like, where did a 49-year-old woman get a second gun in Rome? So we think, yes, there was somebody else involved, but though she never gave the game away or never told that there was anyone else.
Now, not only was she not thanked by the Free State for this anti-fascist action, she was treated abominably when eventually she returned to Ireland, wasn't she?
No, well, she didn't go back to Ireland actually at all.
England.
She went to Northampton. What was done, I mean, Mussolini was pretty upset that he'd been shot, like, by a woman of all people. Mm-hmm. And she, at one stage, she was interrogated quite there after the shooting, and quite for about a year, and she was put through all sorts of medical examinations and psychiatric tests. And she went on hunger strike, started refusing food. And it was decided that it would be an absolute disaster if a British subject, especially one of such pedigree, was to die in an Italian jail. So basically, a deal was put together between Mussolini, the British Foreign Office, and Churchill was there on a couple of occasions. And between those, the Foreign Office and Churchill and Mussolini and the family, it was agreed that she would be sent back to Northampton and into a mental hospital and locked away for the rest of her life. Basically, that's what happened.
And why has history ignored this remarkable woman, do you think?
Well, I think that the fact that she was locked up. Okay, so you're talking in 1927, 26, 27. Actually, it was 95 years ago this week, just gone. She shot him. So there you go, 95 years ago. So she was put into Northampton, and like, she wrote countless letters she wrote to Princess Elizabeth at the time. She wrote to her friends. She wrote to anyone that she could get that had any cachet. She wrote to Churchill. She gave him advice on what he should do during the war and how to protect England against the German paratroopers. But none of her letters were ever posted. They're still there in the archives. Wow. With stamps on them, but they were never posted. And the family definitely wanted her silenced. And like, when she passed away after almost 30 years, her Lord Ashburn at the time, who would have been the next in line, said he didn't want anyone or any attention paid to her death or her funeral. So there was nobody at her funeral, no friends, no family, no nothing. And She just has this little small headstone in Northampton Cemetery, and she actually had left money for a mass to be held in Northampton in the Catholic Church, because she was, but none of her wishes were ever granted. And one nurse wrote that she was so delusional towards the end of her life, she actually thought she had shot Mussolini.
Well, she wasn't far wrong.
No, she was not.
But
no, she definitely did.
It's a fascinating subject. I wish you all the best with the film. How can people see it?
Well, I just very quickly, the film has only really been seen in Ireland so far. It screened last year at the Dublin Film Festival. And then it screened at 2 other festivals here, Kerry and in Limerick, the Richard Harris Film Festival. And because of COVID, like there was film festivals around the world have just literally dried up.
Tell me about it, yeah.
But since the Dublin City Council have decided that they wanted to they are putting up a plaque to honour Violet on her family home in Merrion Square. The story has gone viral, and like that's how did you hear about it? But you know, it literally has gone out there. So I'm hoping we might get a bit more attention now that the story has gone so, you know, it's gone viral, if you like. And maybe we might end up doing some deal with sell the television rights or whatever. But so it will be entered into a few more film festivals. It's not available outside of Ireland just yet, but I'll be happy to let your show know when it does go out. And in the meantime, I'll send you. I made a radio documentary with my wife, Siobhan Lynham. She was kind of the inspiration behind this, bringing Violet's story to the fore. And I'll send you a link to that radio documentary, which is you can pass on.
I will.
And as soon as we have any news, we'll certainly let your show know.
Thank you, Barry. The very best of luck with it. Great subject. Great film.
Thank you very much
for joining us. Well, the poll is still raging, but still 57% of you believe that the media coverage has been measured. 32% of you think it was over the top, but just 11% of you think it was obsequious. 1,368 votes cast so far. You've got another hour to do that. You can email the show at onair@moats.tv. You can tweet us, of course, at George Galloway, at RTUK, and above all, you can telephone the show. The numbers, if you are in the UK, are 02077 982 255. Or if you're in the US, 001 757 744 4480. Now, I have some bundles of social media. I do apologize that I can never get to anything like even a small fraction of those who write in. Please forgive us. But I do read them after the show. I should have looked up obsequious before I voted, says Chris. I voted over the top, but it's definitely been obsequious, although I've learned a new word today, so not all is bad. David says, the separatist response to the sad passing of the Duke of Edinburgh, who did so much to assist children to progress in life and for the World Wildlife Federation, is a disgrace, but predictable. And Will says, I cannot imagine anyone seriously thought there wouldn't be a lot of media coverage. The end of the day, as opposed to only a decade ago, there is innumerable other forms of media if you want to escape the royal stuff. And James says, lefties moaning it's been over the top, and BBC on Friday showing the same on both channels. There's a wonderful thing called remote control. It changes channels or even turns off your TV. It's not like 1982 with only 4 TV channels. Everyone has 50 to 250 channels. They can watch something else if they want to. And VOB says, I've said over the top, but I'm only talking about the specific case of the BBC, putting it across all channels simultaneously. No need for that. Have the coverage, which I thought was mostly good, on BBC One, and run normal shows on 2 for those that are not interested. And Duke not the Duke, but somebody called Duke, says maybe some of it is a bit over the top, but it doesn't annoy me. In fact, if one good thing can come from it, I like seeing something that brings all sides together, minus the vile trolls. I've never been a big royalist, despite being a unionist, which might seem strange. Not strange at all, Duke, let me assure you. And let's have the news, shall we? With Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
The Queen has described the death of the Duke of Edinburgh as having left a huge void in her life. Her son, Prince Andrew, has said. Andrew said that his father's death was a terrible loss and that his family was rallying around. He added, "We've lost the grandfather of the nation," as he left a service at Windsor. Earlier, former Prime Minister Sir John Major said the royal family's shared grief was an ideal opportunity to mend any rifts, a reference to Prince Harry and Meghan's controversial interview with Oprah Winfrey. Prince Harry is expected to attend his grandfather's funeral, but it is not known whether his wife Meghan will be with him. The behaviour of adults in contributing to the actions of young people during the street violence in Northern Ireland amounts to child abuse, the Children's Commissioner has said. Kula Yiyasuma said those adults were engaged in criminal exploitation and have to be held accountable. Almost 90 police officers have been injured in recent disorder. Saturday night was the first without major incident since Good Friday. The lack of trouble has been linked to the death of the Duke of Edinburgh, although there were disturbances in Belfast and Coleraine on Friday night, hours after his death was announced. Saturday also marked the 23rd anniversary of the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, which signalled an end to 30 years of sectarian conflict in Northern Ireland. Irish Taoiseach Michael Martin also warned against a spiral back to violence. The rioting, which has involved people as young as 12, has largely seen youths throwing bricks, fireworks and petrol bombs at the lines of police officers and vehicles. More than 80 people have been killed by Myanmar security forces in a crackdown on a protest in the city of Bago, activists say. The military is reporting to have taken away the bodies of those killed, and the true number of deaths may never be accurately established. Witnesses told local media that soldiers had used heavy weapons and had shot at anything that moved. More than 600 people had been killed since last month's military coup. The military has resorted to increasing levels of violence to maintain its grip on power. The latest killings in Bago, near the main city of Yangon, are reported to have happened on Friday, but it took a whole day to emerge as many residents were forced to flee to nearby villages. Monitoring group the Assistance Association for Political Power said the actual number of deaths was likely to be much higher. Rescue teams are trying to reach 21 people trapped in a coal mine that flooded in China's Xinjiang region. Local media reports say it's not clear what triggered the flooding at Fengguan mine, but it reportedly occurred during an upgrading work on Saturday. Some 29 miners were initially affected, but rescuers managed to free 8 of them. Crews have located all of the trapped miners, state broadcaster CCTV has said. The flooding is reported to have hampered rescue efforts by cutting power underground and disrupting communication lines. Rescuers have been trying to pump water out of the flooded shaft while simultaneously pumping air into the mine, according to CCTV. There has been what has been called another explosive event at a volcano on the Caribbean island of St. Vincent, with power outages and water supplies cut off. The La Soufrière volcano first erupted on Friday, blanketing the island in a layer of ash and forcing some 16,000 people to evacuate their homes. Residents in Barbados, nearly 200 kilometres to the east, have also been urged to stay indoors. Scientists warn that eruptions could continue for days or even weeks. On Sunday, St. Vincent's emergency management organisation NEMO tweeted, quote, massive power outage following another explosive event at La Soufrière volcano. Lightning, thunder and rumblings. Majority of the country out of power and covered in ash. India says it's become the fastest country in the world to administer more than 100 million doses of the coronavirus vaccine amid a deadly second wave of infections. It achieved the feat in 85 days, whereas the US took 89 days and China took 102 days, the health ministry has said. But today, the country reported a record daily increase of over 150,000 cases and more than 800 new deaths. And there are reports that the vast vaccination drive itself is struggling. Half a dozen states have reported a shortage of doses, even as the federal government insisted that it had 40 million doses in stock, and that the allegations of vaccine scarcity were utterly baseless.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway, only on Sputnik Radio.
So has the media coverage of the Duke of Edinburgh's death been A, measured, B, over the top, C, obsequious? 1,461 of you have voted so far. Get your vote in now on my Twitter feed. Now, I did tell you earlier that the last Arab was on the show. He is a prince amongst men, certainly amongst journalist men, which I'll accept as a lower bar. He is the only credible Arab journalist in print anywhere in the Arab world. The rest are all bought and paid for. That's why millions of people go to him every day online for the truth. The truth about any of the many conflicts and many issues circulating in the prelude to what may or may not turn out to be a second Arab Spring. Let's hope it turns out better than the last one, if it is. But the issue in Jordan is the proximate cause for my discussion with him this evening. Although I never really need an excuse to welcome Abdel Barrie Atwan, the editor, founder and editor of Al-Quds Al-Arabi. Very nice to see you again, my dear brother. We were both young men when we started these conversations, and God willing, we'll continue them on the other side. Tell us what happened in Jordan, will you please?
What happened, it was, to be honest, expected, because there was a feud between the King Abdullah of Jordan and his younger brother, or half-brother actually, Prince Hamza, who was a crown prince from 1999 until 2004. And then he was removed by his brother from his title, actually. And then he had a lot of grudges against his brother, simply because he was sidelined completely. There are a lot of rumors that he was in contact with certain people outside Jordan and inside Jordan. He was very popular among the tribes of Jordan, and he was very critical of his brother King Abdullah and the way he is handling the situation in Jordan. We know Jordan suffering from some sort of economical crisis and also a lot of corruption. So he was actually very vocal in criticizing his brother. And there were rumors that he actually contacted certain Gulf states, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, and he was actually supported by them. We don't know, we don't have proof yet about this, but definitely King Hussein was incensed because his brother was challenging him. His brother was actually, in a way or another, conspiracy with certain tribes. So we don't know yet about the details. But anyway, what happened, it wasn't a military coup, simply because King Hamza hasn't got any army, any soldiers beside him. And it wasn't actually some sort of, a revolt or Arab Spring, simply because he was a member of the royal family. but definitely he has support among the tribal society in Jordan.
Now, we both know, you better than I, that Jordan is a very unusual country. First of all, almost half of the population are Palestinian, driven over the border, over the river rather, into Jordan over the last 60 or more years. Secondly, it has a huge influx of Iraqi refugees and a huge influx of Syrian refugees. But the remaining part of the population, what you might call the actual Jordanians, are tribally based, and they very much loved King Hussein, the father of both of these men. It's said that the father, King Hussein, had Hamza as his favorite son. And it is possible, isn't it, that the tribes feel a little warmer towards Hamza than they do towards the king, Abdullah?
Definitely the tribal society in Jordan, actually, they are supporting King Abdullah. But actually, they also respect or highly respect Prince Hamza because he was the choice of his father, actually, as the crown prince, future crown prince. But King Abdullah, after King Hussein's death, he accepted actually his father order or his father wish and appointed Prince Hamza as a crown prince. But 5 years later, he removed him and he appointed his son, Al-Hussein, as his actually crown prince. But, I have to mention clearly here that the tribal society in Jordan, most of the population in Jordan in general, whether they are from Palestinian roots or from East Jordanian roots, they support the monarchy in Jordan. They support King Abdullah. The army also supported him. The military, security establishments also support him. But they have their own grudges. I mean, the people there, because there is economic crisis, because actually there are a lot of corruptions, there is no independent judicial system. The ceiling of the freedom of expression is very low. All this actually was ammunition for people who would like to criticize the monarchy there, criticize King Abdullah. But he is still the symbol of stability and the symbol of actually security and safety in Jordan. So we cannot say that all the tribes are supporting Prince Hamza. No, there are division here, but the majority of the tribal society are supporting the army, supporting the security services, supporting King Abdullah, who is in full control.
So let's talk about the neighborhood, which cannot be separated, of course, from whatever problems exist in Jordan. In Syria, despite much of the world, the Western world and much of the Arab world too, despite a Herculean effort to destroy the Syrian Arab Republic, it has prevailed. The leaders that predicted that Assad must go, will go, they often used to put a date on it. They themselves are now gone. And Assad is still there. Syria is still standing. At what point will those Arab regimes that tried to destroy Syria now seek to make their peace with Damascus, in your view?
George, you are absolutely correct. Most of the Arab countries, or most of the Arab governments, to be actually precise, are dominated by the American administration, whether it is Republican, whether it is Democrats. So they were involved in dirty conspiracy in Syria. They poured billions, tens of billions of dollars to arm certain factions there, supported by the American, by the Turks, in order to topple the regime in Syria. For the last 10 years, there were a lot of actually activities there, a lot of armed forces trying to topple the regime by the help of the American. And President Trump admitted completely, he admitted in public that America spent $90 billion in order to topple Assad. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and United Arab Emirates, they poured money there, billions, tens of billions there, hoping that they can change the regime in Syria after the pretext of the Arab revolt or Arab Spring, under the pretext of actually human rights. But they failed completely because a great deal of the Syrian people supported their regime there, supported Assad. And the army, the Syrian army, managed to steadfast and defend their country, defend their government. And at the end, the whole conspiracy collapsed completely, and about 80% of Syrian territories were actually regained again by the Syrian Arab armies. So Jordan, unfortunately, was part of this conspiracy, and a lot of armed men were actually recruited and trained in Jordan. But now the situation is completely different. Now there is a lot of efforts now to take Syria back to the Arab League and recognize the Syrian government, the Syrian regime, as the legitimate one again in that in Syria in particular. So all these talks about the Arab regimes or the Arab Spring in Syria, in Libya, in Egypt, and most of the Arab worlds actually were a pretext. Excuse from the American to dismantle, to destroy the Arab world, to destroy the countries which supported the Palestinian cause, the Palestinian people, the Palestinian struggle. And if you go back to the Hillary Clinton, the ex-foreign minister of the United States, actually, and her emails, you will tell clearly that the Americans were behind the conspiracy of the Arab Spring, and they supported the destruction of most of the Arab countries in the favor of Israel, in order to make Israeli the strongest country in the Middle East, and also to destroy the Palestinian dreams, Palestinian ambition to establish their own independent state.
Finally, you are one of the very few who interviewed bin Laden. You have, in fact, written very splendid books about that. This extremist, Salafist interpretation of Islam, made famous or infamous by the bin Ladenites, Al-Qaeda, has of course been superseded by an even more extreme ISIS mentality, which led to some of the worst atrocities ever filmed. Are they defeated now, or are they still an incipient danger inside the Arab world?
Well, we cannot say, George, that they were defeated or rooted out completely. I think, they are, in a way or another, lost a lot of their influence, a lot of their actually base in Iraq and Syria. They used to have the Islamic State in part of Syria, part of Iraq, and the capital was Raqqa in Syria. And we know that the coalition of the Iraqi and the Syrian armies and also some of Western intervention managed to root them out. But we have to remember something very, very important. The American always used the Muslim extremists, the political Islam, in order to fight the nationalists, to fight, the socialists, the Russian Empire, Soviet Empire in that time, simply because they saying that it is atheist empire and Muslims should actually fight with the American, fight with the West against these evil empire, as they used to call it. And unfortunately, most of these extremist groups fight under the American flag, under the American umbrella, against the Soviet Union and against the socialist empire and that part of the world in particular. So now, whether they manage to regroup again, that's you have to remember that just about 5 days ago, there was a story saying that the head of one of the leaders of the Islamic States was recruited by the CIA when he was in prison in Iraq. So you can tell how the American actually using these kind of political Islam, these kind of organization for their own ends, to serve their interests, and to use it as a pressurizing cards against their enemy, against Iran, against Syria, against Iraq, against Libya, everywhere. So I believe there is a theory in the Middle East that these kind of organization, these kind of radical Islam, actually invented by United States and by some Western country, especially in Syria and Iraq, in order to actually implement the American strategy to dismantle the Middle East and also to support, in the end, the Israeli empire in the Middle East.
Well, they obviously didn't read Frankenstein right through to the end in that case. Abdel Barrie Atwan, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. 02077 982 255 if you want to get your point of view over on any of the issues that we are discussing tonight. Northern Ireland, the Duke of Edinburgh, the Jordanian and Arab situation. If you're in the US, it's 001 757 744 4480. I'll be back after the break with That Was the Week That Was.
Radio Sputnik.
Call me. Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. Don't bring up a false name. Come on air. Call me and let's have this matter out.
Let's get ready to rumble!
How have you got the nerve to tell people to Brexit if you're not telling them the repercussions?
That's 2016's argument, Michael. I'm no longer arguing with you about the merits of Brexit. I'm arguing with you about democracy, about the right of the majority to have their decision, their vote implemented.
This match will get red hot.
Not have a referendum. Let them have a referendum. Let them sort it out amongst themselves.
I want a referendum. Robert, I want a referendum. Let me put that in capital letters. If you think this year, which is shaping up already to be an annus miserabilis for the SNP, if you think this is your year, go ahead. Come on. Let's have it out.
It's on.
But no, George, it's not as simple as that, right? Have you seen the documentary about Cambridge Analytica and the people who work there? Have you looked at the global
I know nothing about
impact?
them. I'm not interested in them.
Precisely. But because you don't know about them.
I'm not interested in them, Bruce, because it's all a red herring, just like Russiagate was a red herring.
You're up.
Do you only want to hear voices that agree with you? Because if you do, you're not clever enough to be at this open university of the airwaves. In fact, you need to go back to remedial and learn something about what democracy and freedom of speech actually mean.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Now, fascinating on the poll, 56% of you think that the media coverage of the Duke of Edinburgh's death has been measured. 33%, so a third of you, think it has been over the top, but only 11% think it has been obsequious. That's on Twitter. But on Telegram, viewers have a different opinion. There, 30% of you think it has been measured, 50% of you think it has been over the top, and 20% of you, nearly double, think it has been obsequious. What does that tell us about our audience that uses Twitter and our audience that uses the Telegram channel? I'll have to try and work that out. Now, this is where I look back at the 7 days in our past which shaped our present and no doubt our future. This is the week that was. It's difficult to believe now, but this was the day in 2015 that the US President Barack Obama met Raul Castro, the Cuban leader who succeeded his brother Fidel. They met in Panama. It was the first meeting of the US and Cuban heads of state since the Cuban Revolution, which began in 1953. That's Barack Obama looking a trifle limp-wristed in that picture. It seemed to herald an easing of the tension between the two countries and the relaxing of the embargo, but it wasn't to be. It's now back as bad as ever. Going back a bit, it was in 1981 that the arrest of a black man led to hundreds of youths rampaging through the streets of Brixton in South London. Nearly 300 police officers, 65 civilians were injured during 3 days of rioting. I saw it actually burning. After an inquiry headed by Lord Scarman, major changes were implemented in policing. They included an end to the hated sus law, which allowed officers to arrest anyone they suspected of loitering with intent. Black men said that officers used it to target them unfairly. Well, it didn't last, the scrapping of the law. They just do it now under different rules. The Scarman report also led to the setting up of the Police Complaints Authority and the Independent Police Complaints Commission, which followed it. This was the week that Israeli planes and helicopters launched airstrikes against targets in the Lebanese capital, Beirut, in 1996. For the first time in nearly 14 years, but not the last time. I'm sure that the anniversary went unmarked by the thousands of civilians seeking shelter from the bombs. Israel's bombardment of Lebanon became known as Operation Grapes of Wrath. It lasted 16 days. Although Israel apologized for civilian casualties, it blamed Hezbollah for provoking the attacks. The worst attack of the operation came on April 18th, when Israel pounded a UN base at Cana and killed more than 100 refugees. Now, I myself rose in the House of Commons that very day and questioned the then Deputy Prime Minister, Michael Heseltine, on what had happened at Cana. I asked the Deputy Prime Minister if he had watched on the lunchtime news the human remains being swept from a United Nations compound in Cana in South Lebanon. To his credit, Michael Heseltine was pale and shaken and had indeed watched the ribbons of humanity being swept out of that United Nations shelter. It's worth looking up on the YouTube after the show, the question that I raised and the answer that Heseltine gave. Now, it was 60 years this week, that is to say in 1961, this week, that the Russian cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first person to orbit Earth. In Vostok 1, it was almost an everyday thing now, but then, and I think still now, it is one of the most amazing achievements since humans walked on 2 feet. It is amazing that Gagarin then toured Britain, England and Scotland, and I think also Wales, in the 1960s to an absolute hero's welcome. The prestige of Russia in 1945 had then had a steep nosedive during the post-war period of Cold War, witch hunting, and so on. But still, by the time Gagarin appeared in Britain on a tour of congratulation for the epic achievement of being the first man ever to orbit the Earth in space, Russian prestige was again sky high, and everybody loved Yuri Gagarin. It is a sad state of affairs now. that in this country we are supposed to love Germany and hate Russia. Go figure. When, if it wasn't for the Russians, I'd be speaking to you now in German, except I wouldn't be speaking to you at all. Now, who could forget? Well, actually, most people could have. But this was the week in 1954 that Bill Haley and the Comets recorded Rock Around the Clock. It was arguably the birth of rock and roll, though in rock and roll later stages they didn't wear bow ties and red jackets. You may have seen the movie, but this was the week in 1912 that the Titanic actually sank at 2:27 a.m. off Newfoundland as the band played on, with the loss of between 1,490 and 1,635 people, including Leonardo DiCaprio. No, okay, not really. The British impresario Lou Grade financed an earlier movie called Raise the Titanic. He commented ruefully at the time when he saw the bills, it would have been cheaper sinking the Atlantic. I like to recall, indeed I do, that this was the week in 1992 that Neil Kinnock resigned as Labour Party leader, blaming the Conservative-backed press for the party's defeat at the general election. On the 31st of January 2005, the Welsh windbag was made a life peer, to be known thereafter as Baron Bedwetter of Kinnock. I remember vividly 1992 because I was, as the news coverage easily accessible proves, the first Labour member of Parliament to demand Baron Bedwetter's resignation. And fate being what it is, the very next night in a London club, the Groucho Club, in which I was sat, in came Neil Kinnock. And we even ended up in the gentleman's lavatory at the same time. I'll draw a veil over the rest of what happened. In this week, in 1945, British troops entered the German concentration camp of Bergen-Belsen. Mass graves were dug to hold up to 5,000 corpses at a time. The former army guards from the SS were deliberately made to use their bare hands to bury the prisoners, many of whom had died of contagious diseases. Inside the camp, horrified soldiers found piles of dead and rotting corpses and thousands of sick and starving prisoners kept in absurdly overcrowded and filthy compounds. It took a staff of 68 a fortnight to stamp out typhus in the camp. But prisoners too sick to respond to treatment continued to die like flies. And listen to this number. Historians say that as many as 28,000 of the 38,000 prisoners in the camp when it was liberated subsequently died. A bit of a blow for Scottish nationalists in 1746 when the separatist movement effectively ended at the Battle of Culloden, the last battle on British soil. To be fair, it was an attempt to take over the whole of Britain. Royalist troops, though, under the Duke of Cumberland, defeated the Jacobite army of Charles Edward Stuart, the so-called Bonnie Prince Charlie, the would-be king who spoke not a word of English. 96 football supporters were killed in 1989 in Britain's worst ever sporting disaster. They were crushed to death at Hillsborough Stadium in Sheffield during the FA Cup semi-final between Nottingham Forest and Liverpool. The previous worst sporting disaster was in 1971 when 66 fans were crushed to death during the Glasgow Old Firm derby match between Rangers and Celtic. Back to Hillsborough, though, in 2002, the two most senior officers in charge of policing the event were put on trial. One was acquitted, charges against the other were dropped when the jury could not agree on a verdict. And so the families still don't have justice. That's it. Another glorious and inglorious 7 days. That was the week. That was. Let's go to Liverpool for the next call. Michael. Michael
Hi,
in
George.
Liverpool. Hi.
Hi, George. I just wanted to call just to say I agree with the Telegram chat response to the poll.
Yeah, go ahead.
That it has been over the top.
Yeah.
If it wasn't over the top, the BBC wouldn't have streamlined the complaints procedure into the fact that it was over the top. But also, I wanted to clarify what you were saying before, that mostly self-described left-wing people are putting the ugly foot forward over it, and it's regarding that it's because that they don't like the country very much. Would you say that's right in what you were saying at the start of the show? In a nutshell.
I lost the last bit of what you said. Just repeat it.
Beg your pardon. Because it's due to the fact that they hate the country.
Yeah, I think a lot of left-wing people hate the British people. They hate them. They hate them because of their stubborn refusal to adopt and embrace the politics of the student squat.
Okay, and I get where you're coming from in some of it, but at the end of the day, this is the Kingdom of Great Britain. It's not the Kingdom of Thailand or the Kingdom of Bahrain. When the royals are in the news, even if it is for a somber thing, we're allowed to say whatever we want about them. Do you know what I mean? That's one of the things of what I love about this country. So,
of course,
people are allowed to say horrible things about them.
No, you are, of course, entitled, and you're doing it right now, quite apart from anywhere else. You are entitled, but you're also going to be judged by other people on what it is that you say and what it is that you do and what it is that you plainly believe about yourself and about others. So you have to take the rough with the smooth on that, Michael. I'm saying that the knee-jerk leftist response to the death of the Duke of Edinburgh has knocked the so-called left further into the cocked hat in which they were already sat.
Well, fair dues. If that's
Yeah, I mean, that is the way I think, and you won't shift me from it, Michael. My view is that the what passes for the left now, what calls itself left, is identity politics liberals, obsessed with ists and isms and obes. And they are quite unable, too insensitive to even begin to imagine that the majority of their compatriots, whom they must in the end persuade if they are to achieve any of their goals, are not just not attracted by that style of work, but are positively repelled by it. Do you feel me, Michael?
No, I do. I get where you're coming from. But I do think that we obviously do have the right to do that.
You do.
It's one of the things that's positive about this country.
Everybody has the right to commit political suicide, and that's what the left are doing. Here's Richard in Manchester on Northern Ireland. Go ahead, Richard.
Good evening, George. Thank you ever so much for taking my call. It's a good show. It's absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Put my view, please, about what I think is happening. I've had relations in Ireland, both the south and the north, for a long, long time. So I know a little bit about it. I'm 77 years of age, and I've visited many times, and during the Troubles 30 years ago. And hope to God that this never gets there again and the situation doesn't arise. And I'm pretty certain that it will not do. I think that the EU have caused a lot of this trouble with the protocol, which Theresa May, she sold us down the river, and I think that this Prime Minister had no other option, if we wanted to get out of the EU, than to do deals on the fisheries in Scotland and also with regards to the protocol itself. And everything had reasonably settled down until we got out completely out on the 1st of January, and then all hell seems to have been let loose by von der Leyen, by the COVID, by her trying to steal, if you like, our vaccines, which she did. She apologised, but it was too late. And I think it brought a lot of uncertainty with the people in Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, and they didn't know which way people were going. And I think that they've used this, George, as a tool to stir up trouble. And the Lords, the people in the Lords, like O'Donis, and you mentioned Heseltine today, all these people who have made so much money out of the EU, and they want to get us back into the EU, and they've come openly and said, yes, we're going to take you back into the EU as soon as possible. And I think they're traitors, George. And I say that very, very strongly because 17.4 million, as you know, voted for democratically to come out of the EU, and they should have backed us. When COVID came on, everybody should have got together and they should have backed us. And everybody has been fighting each other for political gain. And even Joe Biden has been involved in it, and they're using Joe as a cudgel to say, oh, Joe's grandfather came and he was involved with the Belfast Peace Agreement, and they're using all kinds of things, these opportunist political people. It seems as though the top people have always been there to sign the contracts and so on, when Mo Mowlam, in my humble opinion, was the sole person to take the Catholics and the Protestants together, and she worked tirelessly. Unfortunately, it gave her a cancer and she died. But everybody else who got on the bandwagon, I have no respect for whatsoever. The people of Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland have been doing a great job until this uncertainty came. And when you get other lords and people saying, oh, there's going to be a war in Ireland and so on, I think it's an absolute disgrace, George. And I don't think that they should be tolerated. And it's incited these young kids to come along, and I hope that that's the finish of it in the next couple of weeks, when it's all over and they can get back to normality again.
Richard in Manchester, a powerful call. Thanks for making it. Joanne says, I don't know why people are mourning. These events are a rare occurrence. There's always catch-up TV, Netflix, etc., if you don't want to watch normal TV. Sid says, I'm no royalist. However, I'm from a generation that were taught the values of respect for those who serve. And Kelly says, for a man of his stature and position, they had to grant significant airtime, as will be equally expected, if not more so, for the Queen herself. However, as someone who hasn't watched much TV over the last few days, both prime BBC channels giving simultaneous coverage was too much. And Julie says, the Duke's death is receiving the coverage the man deserved. If a few hours on the TV is all we can give him in return for the service he's given the country, then I don't know why folk are moaning. It's not like we only have 2 or 3 channels anymore. And Ken says, it's been pretty full on. So I voted over the top, but personally, I've enjoyed it. And Sam says, anyone saying that they didn't Google obsequious is lying. To be fair, media coverage hasn't had any impact on me. I no longer watch BBC due to blatant bias and doom-mongering. And Dan says, it's been fabulous. A man who let his wife take the lead. He was remarkable, a visionary, witty, intelligent, charming, and very underestimated. And Colin says, I enjoyed the coverage. It was respectful and interesting, and I was moved by the tributes from people who he had engaged with. The Australian Prime Minister was right when he spoke of the greatest generation. We will never see his like again. I loved that joke that the Duke of Edinburgh apparently made on his first visit to Australia after the Queen's coronation. When told by his officials that he might be asked by the border guards in Australia if he had any criminal convictions, he answered, "I didn't know that was still an entry requirement." Has the media coverage of the Duke of Edinburgh's death been A, measured, B, over the top, C, obsequious? You decide. You can vote for the next 14 or 15 minutes on my Twitter feed. We'll be, after 9 o'clock, hearing from the doctor. He'll see you then. If you've got a question for Dr. Ranjeet Brar, get them in now. Here's the numbers again. In the UK, it's 02077 982 255. If you're in the US, it's 001 757 744 4480. Let me take a break.
Radio Sputnik.
Just when you thought it was safe to eat out to help out, the virus has mutated. You need to gather your team of elites to take down this new variant.
Help us, UK government.
Select your character.
Wishy, rishy, I make dreams come true.
What a Hancock. Oh, I don't know.
Bojo, Jojo, let's get back to normality. Second wave. Fight!
Track and trace the virus. It didn't work. You've wasted billions of pounds. Oh, I don't know. What a Hancock ran away. Bojo Jojo used confusion.
Go back, forward, back a bit. Stay indoors. Don't stay indoors.
The virus is confused, aren't we all? Wishy Rishi used throw money at it.
Wishy, rishy, I make dreams come true.
It didn't work. Only your Tory friends made money.
The R number is increasing.
The Tories used clap for heroes. But it didn't boost the NHS.
The virus is spreading faster. It's the virus's turn. It used unprecedented times. Oh no! You're infected and now have the worst cases in Europe.
Bojo Jojo used it'll all end in tears. But it's far too late. Bojo Jojo used vaccine. That's 93% effective. You've stopped the R number rising.
I've only got a bloody done it. Blah, 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 blah. Now to wait 12 more weeks until the next one.
Lockdown 3! You can play this game in any room in your home. Masks and brain cells aren't included.
Sputnik has been launched to give you a closer look at everything happening in the world.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows, with George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Get your calls in now. It is the second anniversary of the cruel and unusual incarceration of the world's greatest journalist and publisher, Julian Assange. Jamie is in Malaga, wants to talk about that melancholy anniversary. Go ahead, Jamie.
Good evening, George. Thank you very much for taking my call.
Welcome.
As you know, I'm a supporter of Julian Assange, and today was amazed and really pleased to see the number of people really around the world who've taken to the street in support of Julian and the recognition of his second anniversary held in solitary confinement in UK's harshest prison, otherwise known as Guantanamo Bay. I noticed there's an organisation called Candles for Assange, which states that in 30 cities across the world, in 12 countries and 5 continents, people were holding events in recognition of their support for Julian Assange. In London, I've seen masses of photographs which included a double-decker bus with banners and 30 people on board travelling from the Ecuadorian embassy, then to the Westminster Magistrates Court and finishing at Belmarsh Prison, which of course is where Julian is. And on that journey, they had different people they would stop, and they would have different people would make speeches, including outside Westminster Magistrates Court, Dr. Deepa Driver, who I know you've had on your program, who's a very big supporter and campaigner for Julian, so just an amazing person. But also outside the Ecuadorian embassy, Fidel Neves, who was a consular for the Ecuadorian embassy during, really, I believe, 8 years while Julian was an asylee in the embassy. So very encouraging to see the level of support and the dedication of people. And I just wanted to pay my respects to them, and obviously...
Well done, Jamie, and well said. I saw that Peter Hitchens made a statement today questioning whether this could possibly be justified, this apparently endless persecution and the absurdly over-the-top imprisonment of a prisoner who has been found guilty of nothing, being held in a maximum security prison, questioning whether this could possibly be justified. So hats off to Mr. Hitchens in the Daily Mail. Let's go to Bobby in London on the Duke of Edinburgh. Go ahead, Bobby.
Good evening, Mr. Galloway. This is the second time I speak to you, and thank you for taking my call. You are a remarkable man.
Thank you.
I have great honor and respect for you.
Thank you, sir.
You are a good man. And I tell you something, Mr. Galloway. The Worker Party of Great Britain is going to be the opposition of the Conservative Party. The Labour Party under this leader is finished completely. And the person who destroyed the Labour Party is Tony Blair. And I am sure one day he will end up in The Hague.
God willing, Bobby, you're talking my language. Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Yeah. Have John Smith, peace be on him, lived, the Labour Party will never be like that. He will be the most great leader of the Labour Party and great Prime Minister. I was crying for a week. I was in a gym on that day, and I kept hearing, John Smith. Then an Italian friend of mine said to me, "You didn't hear the news?" I said, "No." He said, "John Smith passed away." I nearly collapsed, Mr. Galloway.
Yeah, there was a funereal atmosphere across the whole country, actually. I recall it vividly, the sense that a great oak had fallen in the political forest.
Yeah, and what I call them, the liberal left, who want to destroy the United Kingdom, they are supporter of Nicola Sturgeon. She is not going to win. The United Kingdom will go from strength to strength under your leadership. Everybody wants the United Kingdom. I don't want Scotland to leave the United Kingdom. They will lose on May the 6th.
Well, everyone, all of us would lose, Bobby. Thanks very much indeed for that sterling defence of everything I believe in. Every particular that you said I support and agree with. Scotland would be the loser. Britain would be the loser. As a matter of fact, Scotland, half of the territory of Britain, would immediately become a security risk to the rest of the United Kingdom. something which my friends next door and across the river don't seem fully to have grasped yet. Let's go to Tarif in New Orleans. After all, why wouldn't you go to New Orleans? Go ahead, Tarif.
Thank you, George. Thanks for taking my call and everybody else's call. Thank you.
Welcome.
You got one of the best shows around.
Thank you.
I'm calling about Julian Assange. Free him. He needs to be free. 2 weeks ago, the Pope had written a letter to his to him while he was in prison on Palm Sunday, and a week after that, after Easter, the Pope came up with a message that's under 2 minutes long, talking about the poverty that's in the world, people not having health care, and social injustices that's done to people, and not having jobs, you know, on a planet where you have massive poverty on a planet and people starving. So, and he also included in that speech that you have people that stand up against the injustices against these people, that tells the truth about crimes against humanity. And once these people stands up, their lives get destroyed. They want to becoming like their name gets slandered. They be held without being charged. It was almost like if he was referring to Julian Assange and other whistleblowers and journalists, which is a good thing. If he was doing that, that would shine more light on Julian Assange, especially if in the next week or two, if the Pope the Pontiff come out and say, hey, I'm praying for Julian Assange, for his well-being, for his spirit. We want him to pull through. That's all you have to say. You don't have to get too political. All you have to say is just praying for him, and I'll bring more spotlight on Julian Assange.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. I haven't yet seen the text of the Palm Sunday message that the Pope sent. Neither did I see that statement that you have just referred to, but it is a very encouraging one, Tarif, especially as you have a president that claims to be a Roman Catholic, even though he honours the word of the church more in the breach than in the observance. Thanks, Tarif, very much for that call. The poll is now closed. Has the media coverage of the Duke of Edinburgh's death been A, measured, 56%, B, over the top, 33%, C, obsequious, just 11%. Best part of 2,000 people voted in that poll on Twitter. The Telegram viewers, again, had a very different response, which tells you something, but I'm not sure what. 29% only of our Telegram viewers thought the media coverage had been balanced, measured. 51% thought it had been over the top, and 20% thought it had been obsequious. So you see the tale of two audiences there. It's a matter of opinion which one is correct. I myself think that it has been measured, because when an important personage in the state passes away, like the late John Smith that we have just been talking about, the late John Smith, that great oak that fell, had tremendous reverberations across the country. When a big figure falls in the state, it is inevitable that there will be mass coverage. It's only for a day or two. It'll be big again on Saturday, on the day of the funeral. It's not too much to ask in response to 73 years full-time as the Queen's consort. We have a monarchy. We may one day not have one, but we have one now. And the holders of the high office, the Queen and her husband, are surely entitled to a bit of coverage on the television when they shuffle off this mortal coil. The doctor will see you after the news. Dr. Ranjeet Brar, coming up. Get your calls in now. First, the news with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
The Queen has described the death of the Duke of Edinburgh as having left a huge void in her life. Her son, Prince Andrew, has said. Andrew said that his father's death was a terrible loss and that his family was rallying around. He added, "We've lost the grandfather of the nation," as he left a service at Windsor. Earlier, former Prime Minister Sir John Major said the royal family's shared grief was an ideal opportunity to mend any rifts, a reference to Prince Harry and Meghan's controversial interview with Oprah Winfrey. Prince Harry is expected to attend his grandfather's funeral, but it is not known whether his wife Meaghan will be with him. The behaviour of adults in contributing to the actions of young people during the street violence in Northern Ireland amounts to child abuse, the Children's Commissioner has said. Kula Yiyasuma said those adults were engaged in criminal exploitation and have to be held accountable. Almost 90 police officers have been injured in recent disorder. Saturday night was the first without major incident since Good Friday. The lack of trouble has been linked to the death of the Duke of Edinburgh, although there were disturbances in Belfast and Coleraine on Friday night, hours after his death was announced. Saturday also marked the 23rd anniversary of the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, which signalled an end to 30 years of sectarian conflict in Northern Ireland. Irish Taoiseach Michael Martin also warned against a spiral back to violence. The rioting, which has involved people as young as 12, has largely seen youths throwing bricks, fireworks and petrol bombs at the lines of police officers and vehicles. More than 80 people have been killed by Myanmar security forces in a crackdown on a protest in the city of Bago, activists say. The military is reporting to have taken away the bodies of those killed, and the true number of deaths may never be accurately established. Witnesses told local media that soldiers had used heavy weapons and had shot at anything that moved. More than 600 people had been killed since last month's military coup. The military has resorted to increasing levels of violence to maintain its grip on power. The latest killings in Bago, near the main city of Yangon, are reported to have happened on Friday, but it took a whole day to emerge as many residents were forced to flee to nearby villages. Monitoring group the Assistance Association for Political Power said the actual number of deaths was likely to be much higher. Rescue teams are trying to reach 21 people trapped in a coal mine that flooded in China's Xinjiang region. Local media reports say it's not clear what triggered the flooding at Fengguan mine, but it reportedly occurred during an upgrading work on Saturday. Some 29 miners were initially affected, but rescuers managed to free 8 of them. Crews have located all of the trapped miners, state broadcaster CCTV has said. The flooding is reported to have hampered rescue efforts by cutting power underground and disrupting communication lines. Rescuers have been trying to pump water out of the flooded shaft while simultaneously pumping air into the mine, according to CCTV. There has been what has been called another explosive event at a volcano on the Caribbean island of St. Vincent, with power outages and water supplies cut off. The La Soufrière volcano first erupted on Friday, blanketing the island in a layer of ash and forcing some 16,000 people to evacuate their homes. Residents in Barbados, nearly 200 kilometres to the east, have also been urged to stay indoors. Scientists warn that eruptions could continue for days or even weeks. On Sunday, St. Vincent's emergency management organisation NEMO tweeted, quote, "Massive power outage following another explosive event at La Soufrière volcano. Lightning, thunder and rumblings. Majority of the country out of power and covered in ash." India says it's become the fastest country in the world to administer more than 100 million doses of the coronavirus vaccine amid a deadly second wave of infections. It achieved the feat in 85 days, whereas the US took 89 days and China took 102 days, the health ministry has said. But today the country reported a record daily increase of over 150,000 cases and more than 800 new deaths. And there are reports that the vast vaccination drive itself is struggling. Half a dozen states have reported a shortage of doses, even as the federal government insisted that it had 40 million doses in stock and that the allegations of vaccine scarcity were utterly baseless.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway, only on Sputnik Radio.
Well, if you're in England, as I am this evening, tomorrow is a very, very important day. You'll be able to sit and drink alcohol, if that's your fancy, in the beer gardens of England. You'll be able to shop in non-essential shops. I intend doing so myself in the morning. You'll be able, joy of joys, to sit outdoors in cafes. You'll be able to, well, get back to something remotely like normal life. But not if you're in Scotland. Despite pirouetting daily on live television, courtesy of the misnamed BBC, which in Scotland seems to exist to break up the bee, though what they imagine their own fate would be in those circumstances, it's quite difficult to fathom. But thanks to the BBC, Nicola Sturgeon has had more than a year of live television appearances, 5 days a week. I'm not making that up. Until now, even in the middle of an election campaign. These appearances have been used to pretend that Scotland had the answers, that England didn't, that the rest of the UK didn't. It's part of the superiority complex of your average Scottish nationalist. And of course, like most master race theories, it doesn't hold any water at all, because after pursuing entirely separate stratagems to deal with the coronavirus pandemic, Scotland is worse off than anywhere else in the United Kingdom. Scotland is the COVID capital of Britain. Its vaccination performance lamentably poorer than the rest of the United Kingdom. Its death rate, one of the worst in the entire world. 10 times the number of deaths per head of population as there has been in Denmark, a country that, for some peculiar reason, Scottish nationalists always like to compare themselves with. Except in Scotland, you're 10 times more likely to have perished as a result of the coronavirus. And so in Scotland, when I go back home tomorrow, there will be none of your beer gardens, none of your outdoor cafes, none of your non-essential shops. For at least 2 weeks, maybe more. It's a miserable patchwork of outcomes to what has been a melancholy 12 months and more. Before I introduce Dr. Brar, here's the second poll of the evening. What is David Cameron's greatest shame? The Brexit? The Lobbygate? That's the big scandal that he is now right at the heart of, where a bankrupt merchant banker and derivatives futures trader from whom he was due to gain more than £20 million, but for whose interests he was still lobbying secretly at the heart of government, even when his patron, Greensill, was headed for bankruptcy. So we're calling that Lobbygate. What is David Cameron's greatest shame? A, Brexit. B, Lobbygate. C, farm animals. I have no idea what my young and clever friends through the glass mean by that. But you can vote on my Twitter feed. Again, we are joined by the Oracle, man who has led us through the whole of this pandemic. Dr. Ranjeet Brar, doctor, physician, surgeon. Welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. It's the eve of the grand reopening. Dr. Ranjeet, how do you feel about that?
Very optimistic, George. I do feel that we have moved a long way towards the end of the pandemic, at least in this country with the vaccination program. So if we look at the figures, you can see the UK cases this week are down to 15,000. That's about half of what they were last week. The deaths have remained relatively static. That's more a sign of people who have already contracted COVID and are still languishing in hospitals with it. But the actual number of people in hospitals with coronavirus, they're now occupying only 3% of our hospital beds. So overall,
what was that at worst, Doctor?
That was over 40% nationally, wow. George. Of what we have a very small now hospital bed capacity, which has been at the heart of our problems in dealing with this pandemic, of probably only 100,000 acute care beds, 140,000 beds in total, but many of those day case and mental health beds are not acute medical care beds. So very small bed capacity, but now one tenth really of the numbers of people with COVID in hospital that we had just in January, George. So I think it's high time we began to move beyond this stage. I've been looking to see when we can think about relinquishing masks. Overall, there's little guidance, and experts are widely divergent in their opinions. But over the next few months, it should be the case that we start to reduce the social restrictions, which are already having less and less merit as we move out of the pandemic, George.
I've kind of had it with masks myself. They are a real problem for someone who must wear spectacles like me. You will be entitled to condensation if you are wearing a mask and spectacles. I'm wearing my mask less and less often. The very second I can take it off, I do. Even if I have to dangle it from one ear to quickly put it back on again. When do you think normal life, like going around without a mask, might return?
So the divergence of opinions rests on a couple of things. One, as we've talked about again and again with coronavirus, is a funny disease, strange disease, not funny perhaps, but peculiar disease, because of its difference, its asymmetry in the way it affects the population. So we know it affects the very old disproportionately and the unwell disproportionately, but the very young and very fit really, are at very little risk from it. We know that elderly and vulnerable population have been vaccinated and are at far lower risk now of either contracting or having serious effects from coronavirus. So in a sense, that is the majority of the problem over. So there are experts who say that now is the time. There are other experts who will say, we'll always have masks, and which I think, but these are both extreme positions. But I think towards, over the next few months, over the summer, we're going to see extremely low rates, almost no patients in hospital, very, very few, if any, deaths. And people will start to say, at the moment, I'm wearing my mask more out of courtesy for the social fear of others. And of course, because there's legislation behind it. But I don't feel really it's necessary. I don't feel any risk. I've had 2 vaccinations. I'm routinely in hospital where I feel safe, and out of hospital I feel extremely safe. So for my own personal safety, I'm not doing it. It's more out of courtesy for others. But that, of course, is a product of information that we give to the public. So, over the next few months, I will expect, most experts think that we're going to have it for the rest of this year. I would imagine that, over the summer, we're going to see it less and less. Exactly when the government, change the legislation, that's not absolutely clear to me, having seen, they talk about phases, and phase 4 or phase 5 being the point at which we'll get rid of masks, but there's no time frame that the government has laid down in that specification so far, George.
Now, I'm getting my second jab this week, which is less than the 12 weeks from the first. That was the worst case scenario. So thank you very much indeed to my local health board. It will be a Pfizer one, which I'm glad about now, because even if it is exaggerated and even if it is marginal, the Pfizer one does seem to have less potential side effects than the AstraZeneca. So does that mean I can't get it after I've had that second jab, or just that I can't get it so severely that I'm going to die of it?
So I think good that you're having it, George. I'm very pleased for you. I essentially think there's no 100%. So, you're kind of 93% chance of not getting COVID after that, and 7% chance of getting it based on the statistics of the initial trial. There are different statistics with different population groups in different countries from the actual mass rollout, but probably that's broadly right, about 95% chance of not having it. That's very similar in studies of patients who have had COVID in the first wave. Their chance of then getting COVID again is very similar. So essentially, you are protected. In terms of your chance of not getting serious COVID, hospital admission, hospitalization, or heaven forbid, dying of COVID, again, massively high chance of being protected. So it's not zero. Nothing in life is absolute zero, but very, very small chance, George. And of course, as the rates of COVID become much lower, consequent upon essentially now a vaccination-based herd immunity that we're beginning to see in the country, your chance of coming into contact with it less. So chance of coming into contact much less, chance of contracting it if you do, much less, chance of having severe infection or death, should you be unlucky enough to contract it, again, down. So if you add all of those, probabilities up, you can see why we can be confident that actually we're very unlikely to get any further meaningful wave of COVID infection that corresponds to hospitalization, mortality, severe illness, as they are now currently seeing across Europe.
Well, I was about to ask you about that. Now, it's very difficult to fathom how the European Union, which has quite a high conceit of itself, has performed so disastrously badly in its vaccination rollout, to the extent that Angela Merkel, under real political pressure in Germany now, her party she's going. But her party is only a little bit ahead of the Green Party now in public opinion polls in Germany, heading for disastrous election results. Angela Merkel has taken the leap. She has announced that the German government is now in negotiation with the Russian government over buying millions of doses of Sputnik V, Sputnik 5. Why didn't the rest of the EU do that, Doctor?
Very good question, George. So I think I think it's entirely sensible policy on Germany's part to approach Russia for what is clearly one of the best, if not the best, vaccine available to fight the pandemic, which has been well proven in excellent trials. Of course, what's been happening throughout the EU is the systematic surrendering of sovereignty towards the central Brussels authority, and that now also goes along with the local, the EMA, the European Medicines Agency. Their regulatory approval of medicines is now a centralised process rather than a national specific process, and that has proven to be an unwieldy and slow process. Whereby the EMA essentially have been slow to recognise vaccines, buy vaccines, think about obtaining stock. And the individual states, nation states, are not supposed to flout these central regulations coming from Brussels. So, a few of the former Eastern European countries, Hungary in particular, Slovakia, Yugoslavia has made some noises about it as well, have in fact approached Russia and issued emergency licenses independent of the EMA. The EMA itself, have been very slow to do so, and now I think that's resulted in Germany saying, we're going to have to make our own arrangements over and above the heads of EMA. Of course, Europe as a whole, you're dealing with 450 million people. It's a massive population. It's a very unwieldy system, whereas each of those nations would have had their own regulatory process, which would have been more responsible, at least, I think you'd have to say, to local political pressure of the feelings of the workers on the ground who are suffering the effects of ill health, George.
Yes, it is pure politics, isn't it? There's no genuine way in which the EMA could doubt the efficacy of the Sputnik vaccine, which is an old, tried and tested vaccine technology with a better record than either Pfizer or Oxford AstraZeneca, cheaper than both, and with the quite considerable advantage of not having to be kept at abnormally low temperatures.
All of those things are absolutely true, and they have actually got some of the best published data. Still, the RNA, mRNA vaccines that we're taking, the Pfizer, the Moderna, still haven't published full trial results, George. We're still working on the first interim analysis of their randomized controlled trial, which is run by the company rather than any third body of scientists. Now, we've got good data on massive populations now as they're being rolled out to suggest they're efficacious and safe, and we'll keep on looking at those things. But that's different from the Sputnik vaccine, which has an excellent published randomized control phase 3 trial published in The Lancet, which I've been able to scrutinize in detail, as well as their more preliminary studies. But the EMA are so obviously politically involved with a kind of trade rivalry with Russia, and that can only be the interest of the large pharmaceutical companies wanting to protect their markets, wanting to only sponsor and advocate their own large multinational conglomerate companies and their local and worldwide market share and profits. It can be the only reason, because the EMA have gone to the extent of questioning the ethics of that trial, despite the fact it was published in a very normal way in a well-respected scientific journal. And the EMA certainly wouldn't go to the lengths of criticizing the ethics of any of the other vaccines that they haven't published results, or indeed other publications within, or other papers within such a publication which have had rigorous peer review. So really impugning the whole of the nature of the scientific establishment by implication. But really the essence of the matter is very clear. This is a matter of trade. This is a matter of money. This is a matter of putting the health and well-being of their own working people second, and the interests of their own multinational corporations first, George.
And finally, Doctor, I'm grateful for your time as always. I've been struck by the situation in India, which now appears to be in the grip of yet another wave. What can you tell us? You have family back there. What can you tell us about what's gone wrong, if at all, if it's gone wrong? Maybe it was unavoidable, but what, if anything, has gone wrong in how the Indian government has tackled this?
Well, George, India is often talked about as if it's the largest democracy in the world. It's the largest capitalist economy in the world. There's massive disparity of wealth. There's a very large, relatively affluent middle class. There's a small, very, very wealthy billionaire class. So we know about Sanjeev Gupta was also, Sanjeev Gupta was also wrapped up in his Liberty Steel with Greensill Capital. So there's this element of the Indian population, but it also still has the majority of the world's poorest population. So there's incredible, inequality in India. There is lack of access to publicly funded medical care for those poorest sections of the population. We still don't really know. I think true figures from India is the honest truth. My father's generation in India wouldn't have known accurately their birth dates because those records weren't kept. That's no longer quite the case. Records are much better and more widespread, but precise data about the extent of the pandemic is not clear. Certainly at the beginning stages, I was having reports from friends who work in Indian hospitals that essentially people were turning up and not being diagnosed. There was a drive to a bureaucratic drive and political drive to keep the figures low. So I'm not sure if we'll ever know the full extent of the problem in India. But yes, the numbers are certainly increasing. Very early in that pandemic, when they decided that they would have an early lockdown in India, very difficult to have a lockdown where a large number of the population are dependent on their wages, a large migrant population in the cities. But what they did was they locked down, but they sent the population who worked, in construction and relatively low paid insecure jobs in the heartlands of the cities were sent out of the cities and back to the villages. And that effectively, to me, would have spread the COVID virus throughout the country from its hotspot. So lots of things were done at a political level, as well as the economic structure of the country itself and the overall political structure. Corruption is endemic to the extent that a new party has arisen called the Aam Aadmi Party, which is a so-called anti-corruption party, itself also now implicated in elements of corruption. That is the nature of the way this state works. Very different from China, where the government is very responsive to the needs of the population, similar in size, but you can see how far one has advanced since its revolution of 1849, and one has become an extremely unequal society and hasn't achieved the kind of potential it really could have done, that being India, since its independence from Britain at the hands of
more or less
Montgomery
the same time.
in 49. Very similar time.
It is, and as a comparator, and of course they're neighbours, so the comparison is quite an interesting one and often a stark one. Dr. Ranjeet Brar, thanks again for joining us, as always, on the mother of all talk shows. What is David Cameron's greatest shame? A, Brexit, 33%. B, Lobbygate, 33%, close. C, farm animals, 28%. Whatever can they mean? Again, a slightly different result on the Telegram poll. 28%, so 5% fewer, say Brexit. 41%, so 8% greater, say Lobbygate. And 31%, 3% more, say his predilection for farm animals. Let me take a quick 60-second break to recover from that very thought.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. As Fisher says, the Twitter sphere where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. The top cat in these parts, it is mostly active on Sunday evenings in Britain and mid-afternoon in the United States. It seldom roars during the day. Most notable for its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Okay, the rest of the show is yours. On the Duke of Edinburgh, on the protests in Belfast, in Northern Ireland, on England unlocking tomorrow. Will you be trying to get a drink in a beer garden near you, or will you, like me, be looking for a barber? You can call me on 02077 982 255, or you can call us from the US on 001 757 744 4480. Nick in Bridgewater is next on the line. Go ahead, Nick.
How far and how deep can I go into this conversation about the states and Parliament, etc.?
Well,
how far are you willing to go?
That's an invitation, Nick. Let's go wherever you want to go, my lad. Go on.
Okay, well, I'm a UK citizen and travelling around the United Kingdom for the last 19 years. It's all now in the public domain. I was known as Batman, a political protester that used to be Fridays for Justice. Well known in different organisations around the United Kingdom in different cities and towns, etc.
Yes.
Now, several United Kingdom citizens have been infiltrating public sectors all across the United Kingdom in a big plan for 17 years to try to stop the publishment of fake news, fake storylines, our prime ministers and people in power reading off scripts when the real people that had their eyes open to civilizations across this continent since the beginning of the so-called Rothschilds that owned the US.
How does Rothschild fit in? No, before you go any further, what is this gratuitous dropping in of the name Rothschild, Nick?
This is what I'm just about to get to.
Well,
now,
I do hope you're going to support it with science rather than anything much murkier.
Well, do I actually need science to prove that previous medical examinations that was controlled through MDs and the crop pesticides that's sprayed on all our lands, that our then farm animals eat, that then the human race eat, that then gets into your systems, and I have DNA sampleizations to prove it. And they also have it in Portadown in the United Kingdom. I clearly understand exactly what I am saying here, what I'm broadcasting.
Well, you may understand it, but I certainly don't. I don't understand a word that you're saying.
Okay, then. So can you tell me, how is it that the dollar was bailed out by the Federal Reserve?
So we've gone from DNA sampleizations, a word with which I'm not familiar, and I'm quite good at the English language, through crop circles, through...
No, not crop circles. No. I didn't say crop circles.
All right.
I'm on the pesticide, GMOs.
Forgive me, that you were on such a curve, such an arc. I just felt that crop circles must be coming next.
No.
What does any of this have to do with the Rothschilds?
Right. So shall we get back to the way that they took the land, first of all, of America, how then that they took the Federal Reserve, how they then took Congress, how they then put people that you see as public figures on the public domain and in the public eye. They're always reading off of scripts.
I have concluded, Nick, that you may not. Hold on. I have concluded that you may not be an anti-Semite, but may instead be simply stark raving mad. Such is the venality implied in being an anti-Semite. Be grateful that I'm leaning towards the analysis that you're stark raving mad. Best get your Batman suit back on again and go looking for DNA samplizations. Julian is in London. Let's hear from him. Julian, go ahead, sir.
Well, that's Batman. I'd hate to meet Robin. Thanks, George. I've got a little brain teaser for you.
Yes.
Which dangerously unstable country had its artificial borders drawn up by the British in 1921?
Ireland?
Sorry, George, the answer's Jordan. But you could have said Ireland. Ireland was partitioned and the artificial state of Northern Ireland was created in the same year as Jordan. And I think that...
Tell us the background, Julian, of that, because many people will not know how Jordan came to pass. I recall meeting a very elderly gentleman, now gone, who was born before Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Israel were founded. And I asked him, if you were born before these countries even existed, what did you call yourselves? And he thought for a moment and he said, we were Arabs. It is extraordinary how recent all these countries are. Of course, Israel not until 1948, but even Lebanon, Syria, Jordan didn't exist 100 years ago. Go ahead, Julian.
Exactly, and a lot of the loyalists in the north of Ireland imagine that Northern Ireland is not part of Ireland. But if they were born 100 years ago, they were born on the island of Ireland. And these false situations, these creations from the imperial powers, I think they've only got a lifespan of about 100 years. And I've been to Jordan a few times, usually on the way to Palestine, and I've met just as many Palestinians in Jordan as I have in Palestine. And there's a sense that it's kind of it's a very vacuous country. It's beautiful, the landscape and everything, but most people that live there feel like they're not really from there. And you mentioned tonight about the influx of refugees from Syria, from Iraq, on top of the 70% of the population that are actually consider themselves Palestinian.
And yet, Julian, Abdel Bari, who is the oracle, he seemed fairly clear that the government, the monarchy, the system in Jordan is still pretty secure. Is that how you see it?
I think so, and maybe that's because it's not a democracy, but I think in a lot of places in the Middle East, people actually love the king more than the places that have a president, because often the president is somebody who either killed the king or the son of someone who might have ousted a king. It's an interesting one.
You know? Good point.
Well, I'll leave you with another point.
Kings are actually more loved than presidents, something that British Republicans might want to consider. Last point, Julian.
Last point, consider this. The current king of Jordan, son of an Englishwoman, is more English than your friend, Prince Philip.
There you go. Prince Philip's service to Britain is therefore all the more commendable in that he had no need whatsoever to volunteer it. Thanks, Julian. Now, from Bridgewater to Colchester, Chris is on line one about vaccines. Go ahead, Chris.
Hiya.
Hi.
I think we can agree that the Russian vaccine is being kept off the market, probably in the UK and Europe, for political reasons.
Yeah.
Then maybe we could talk about ivermectin, a treatment that Dr. Tess Laurie's been pushing. Dr. Peter McCulloch who testified in front of the committee in Texas, saying that early treatment, this could save a lot of lives. It's cheap and effective, but it's not being used. It has been used in other countries like Peru and India, and then was taken off the market again in Peru. So why can't we use drugs like this?
Well, maybe for the same reason that Peru took it off the market, leaving only India in the whole world that agree with you about its efficacy.
Oh, it's not me. It's not coming from me. It's coming from people much more highly qualified than Dr. Brar, Dr. Tess Lawrie, Dr. Peter McCulloch. Take your pick. I mean, these drugs, Dolores Cahill, the developers of the drug won a Nobel Prize. It's big pharma that's only wants these vaccines pushed forwards. These vaccines you keep cheering for that have killed nearly 800 people now in the UK, according to the MHRA government yellow card system. So, you know,
I take it you're not going for the vaccine yourself then, Chris?
No, but if I had to, I'd take the Russian one, but it's not going to be available. But I won't be taking. I'm more at risk from the vaccine than I am for COVID at my age.
All right, mate.
Why would I?
Thanks very much for the call. Josh is in London. Let's go to Josh.
Oh, hi, George. How's it going?
Good, thank you. Good show tonight, I think.
Yeah, no, and how's everything up in Scotland?
All good. As you know, I don't abuse this platform to talk about my own political campaigns, so I hope you're not asking me about that.
Oh, no. Well, not specifically that. I was just going to ask, because I've looked at some of the statistics about crime in Scotland in relation to the rest of the UK, and apparently for the since the beginning of the turn of the century, it has actually been considerably lower. Of course, I'm not saying it's an SNP achievement, and because it was in decline, the crime rates were in decline consistently for several years before the SNP took power. So I don't think they can claim credit to that solely. And also, of course, Scottish legal system has always been separate from the English legal system in any case since the Act of Union. So I don't think I'm not saying it's a case for Scottish independence, but what would you say to a nationalist who uses that statistic as a case for the SNP's management of Scotland? Do you think
their management of Scotland is catastrophic across the board. Let's start with the issue of law and justice. At this point in time, the Scottish justice system, through its own description, malicious prosecutions of entirely innocent men who were the administrators of Rangers Football Club, is going to cost the taxpayer £100 million. This in a country where the police budgets have been cut to the bone, where the previous pattern of local constabularies have been centralised in one police force in Edinburgh, it being easier for a politician to control one chief constable rather than 8 chief constables, all answerable to their local people. The performance of the law officers has reduced the status of the country's justice system to absolute ribaldry. The performance over the Salmond prosecution being, if you like, the most celebrated case in point, though there are many others. So we have a single police force which has been starved of funds, even though funds have been hoarded that have come from the Treasury in London, destined for the compensation of businesses in Scotland which never received it. There is grand larceny in the government of the SNP in Scotland. This much is widely known and is in fact a commonplace now in Scottish politics. The presence of the Lord Advocate as a political member of a political cabinet, a nationalist political cabinet is a completely untenable situation. So if I had anything to do with it, the Scottish police would be again disaggregated. We would have a chief constable in every one of the previous constabulary regions responsible to elected councillors in those areas. That's the kind of overhaul that we need in the Scottish justice system. Let me go with Mark in North Carolina, although in a minute after this break.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together? Well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Now, we need your votes on this poll. What is David Cameron's greatest shame? Brexit, Lobbygate, or farm animals? Get your votes in now on my Twitter feed. Mark is in North Carolina. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Mark.
Hey, there's a lot on my mind, George, but I really want to bring up is what's going on with Russia now.
Okay.
This madman, this demented imposter that sits there in the White House is trying to provoke, to me, the mightiest country in the world right now. I believe that's Russia, because their military is finely tuned and they're ready for anything on their border. And meanwhile, our military is totally dysfunctional today.
Why do you think Biden? Do you think Biden is bluffing, Mark, or does he really fancy? What I can certainly say, and I agree with you, would be a short, sharp hiding from the Russian armed forces.
Okay, this is what I believe right now. Okay, if he wasn't so demented, I would say this is probably just about a sure thing. That they're waiting for Russia to move on to Ukraine. They'll probably have to go right into Kiev this time because the Ukrainians are, they're run by a bunch of Nazi thugs. I mean, their military is a bunch of Nazi thugs, and they can't keep on having this kind of activity on their border, and they can't let NATO go in there either. However, and my opinion on that is that NATO and basically the U.S. would do nothing because, except use propaganda and try to get more sanctions, which mean nothing to the Russians today because they're a great producing nation, and they've got a great trading partner in China and Iran, India, and other countries. But unfortunately, since we have a man who is not all there, who is got a brain, it's like somebody was saying he's 78 or 79. And his brain is a guy about 105. Okay, I mean,
or
the
5
guy isn't there. Okay.
Or 5, maybe 5.
Yeah. And, or 5. Okay, and he's not there. Let's be honest with you. He's not there. So anything is possible when you have a madman like that with his finger on the nuclear trigger. This country is in terrible shape, George. The fact is, this was a stolen election. I'm 100% sure of it. I'm not 99%. I'm 100% sure it was a stolen election, and this man's an imposter. He doesn't belong there. And not that I was a great fan of Trump. I wasn't. But Trump at least was in control of his facilities. Okay, he was a little weird and odd and stuff, but at least he was,
his brain was functioning properly, and he was, and I don't think he really wanted war. I don't think he would have pushed something like this. As a matter of fact, Ukraine wasn't a big deal for him, other than he almost got impeached because of because he tried to find out really what Biden and his son were up to when they went into Ukraine. So I'm really concerned, because let's be honest with you. NATO would be defeated on the ground, but then would the U.S. refrain from then launching nukes, and then of course Russia would have to launch their own nukes, and that would of course probably be the planet as we know it.
Well, of course,
that's what I'm concerned.
In the worst case, we won't be celebrating our 100th episode of Sputnik, because no one will be left alive. That is the worst case scenario. It's hardly likely, Mark, that it will get to that. But a war between Russia and the Ukraine, backed by NATO, some kind of war, looks tonight all but inevitable. The call by the Ukrainian president to invade Russian territory in Crimea, the onslaught against the Russian-speaking population, which is 1/3 of the whole population of Ukraine, who live in the eastern part of the country, bordering Russia, can only provoke Russia to enter Ukraine to defend its people. Indeed, the Kremlin spokesperson said that this very week. So you're quite right to indicate that these are very dangerous times. But you're also right to say that in any such war, there could be only one winner. And that may, at least I hope, make NATO think twice about it. Mark, thanks for the call. Sarkar is in Glasgow. Go ahead, Sarkar.
Good evening, George. Really nice to see you, fit, healthy.
Thank you.
George, small question, basically. We're having this Hartlepool by-election in the next few weeks. Recently, a union has done an opinion poll, and they have found that Tories would be winning that seat. And they would have won that seat had Brexit Party at that time not stood in front of them.
That's right. The Brexit Party took 10,000 votes in Hartlepool.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, here's the joke. Labour are now accusing the union of siding with the Tories. The same Labour for 4 years kept calling anyone who supported Brexit names, xenophobes, everything.
Racists.
If only they listened to the working class people.
We were racists.
Yes, absolutely, George. And if only they listened to the working class people.
Exactly.
This union who conducted the poll, it was not like they are supporting the Tories. They are just the messenger. So the Labour Party are putting all their heavyweights. I think 6 or 7 MPs will be going to Hartlepool in the next few weeks to campaign.
I'm not sure they've got 6 or 7 heavyweights, Sarkar. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I think if I was a betting man, I would say that the Conservatives are overwhelmingly likely to capture Hartlepool, which is just about as much of a cornerstone of the former Red Wall as it's possible to imagine. If you have seen Hartlepool, then the idea that it would be a Conservative seat is quite far-fetched, but overwhelmingly likely now. Incidentally, Sarkar, separatism has now broken out in Hartlepool, where there is a party standing called the Northern Independence Party. They want to
Sturgeon's cousins, by any chance?
Sturgeon's cousins. They want to break up England. The fact that the leader and candidate in Hartlepool of the Northern Independence Party lives in Brighton will never not be funny. Sarkar, thanks for the call. Michael is in Minneapolis on the George Floyd case update. Michael, always welcome. What's happened this week?
Oh, I'll tell you, George, I know the hour is late. Thanks for having me on the show, as always. That's all I'll get to. I'd say there's three main points that happened this week. The prosecution made 2 points. One, that Officer Chauvin totally went outside the bounds of his training. There were several very powerful witnesses on that, including the Minneapolis chief of police, a guy who's been on the force, Madaria Arredondo, who's been on the force since 1989. He said, once someone's in custody and they are no longer a threat, what Chauvin did went way beyond the scope of what they're, allowed to do, and said it is not, consistent with their training or their ethics, which I thought was really the line that rang through. Mm-hmm. And then they also had training. They included an officer who had trained Chauvin specifically, and they showed actually the training that Officer Chauvin had received. So they show that, what he did to George Floyd was way outside the bounds of any kind of training he'd received. Then they had a parade of medical witnesses, which I think were extremely damning from the perspective of the defense. The admitting emergency room physician, said that Floyd died due to lack of oxygen or asphyxia. And then they had essentially a parade of other medical experts who specialize in this sort of thing to reinforce that point and say that, he clearly died. He didn't die of a heart attack or any other reason. He died, from lack of oxygen, from the position he was put into and the stress that was put onto his body. And then I'd say, so the third thing, I think the thing the defense was really counting on was saying, oh, well, this is a drug overdose situation. He was high. That's the real reason he died. And so I think they had a forensic toxicologist on there to testify. And he said that, well, there was some fentanyl found in George Floyd's blood. There was also norfentanyl, which is metabolized fentanyl. And overdose victims basically almost never have norfentanyl in their blood. He testified to that. And he said that Floyd's ratio of fentanyl to norfentanyl was not even close to what you normally see in post-mortem cases where that's the cause of death. So I think, the defense is trying really hard to get the extended body cam footage from the officers admitted into evidence. And they're still trying to get the man who was with George Floyd on the stand to testify, although he is still claiming Fifth Amendment, and the judge Cahill has not ruled on that to this point. But it was a bad week for the defense, and I think a lot of legal analysts think the defense spent a bunch of time trying to undermine the medical experts of the prosecution, and really didn't do themselves any favors in doing
Michael, thank you for that necessarily truncated report. Grateful to you for it. See you next week, I hope. But there's a legend on the line, so we have to clear everyone off. It's Norma in Bristol. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, George. It's just three separate points. You never get very many women callers, and I mean, it would be nice if we had some.
Yeah. Why do you think that is?
I think they're frightened of you.
Frightened of me?
Yeah. Anyway, listen, I've got three little points. I like hearing Barrie Atwan. I think he's always worth listening to, and he's on Jordan. Yes, I've seen him over the years. Second point, you were on Big Brother. Did you know Nikki Graham?
I didn't know. She was on a different show.
Well, she was a unique
She's passed away, yeah.
Yeah, and she died of 38 years old of anorexia.
It's tragic.
It was, because she had a unique personality. And the last point, George, I saw a great film this afternoon called Once More, and it was Morgan Freeman, and I think he's a marvellous actor. Do you know Morgan Freeman?
I don't. I've never met him, but he is the voice of God.
Oh, honestly, I've fallen in love with him.
Well, don't tell your husband. Norma, there's another woman caller on the line. Will you forgive me? Will you forgive me? Thanks for that. Nikki in Paris. Go ahead, Nikki.
Hi, George.
How wonderful to get two women callers in a row.
I hope you're well. I'm calling about Julian Assange again. with a request this time, actually. Okay. I wanted to point out, first of all, that it's very interesting that the EU President, Ursula von der Leyen, made a huge statement about the tragic shooting of a journalist in Greece called Karaivas, and has never mentioned Assange. Very interesting that she and as the EU President made a statement in terms of an unknown journalist.
Actually, Nikki, that happens literally all the time. The British government keep issuing statements in defense of journalists, condemning tyranny for cracking down on journalism. And this is faithfully reported by the unbribed British press corps, none of whom ever refer to the fact that the world's most celebrated journalist is in Belmarsh prison in London, in the very same city in which they are themselves reporting. British hypocrisy knows no bounds, and there is no issue on which that's more clear than the issue of Julian Assange. Good night.